She did nothing wrong. She simply went to visit someone she used to trust. And she never came home. This is the story of Alexis Gabe, and it will stay with you long after it ends.
Their eyes closed, like they expected out of it. I didn't. You did it. That
This is Marshall and his mother, Alicia. Just feet away, inside the trunk, lies the dead body of Marshall's girlfriend. He has cut her body up and plans to discard it in the remote mountains of the Sierra foothills. Over the next several weeks, a series of small mistakes in Marshall's cover-up would bring him face to face with local police and the FBI.
Some stories stay with you long after you finish hearing them. Not because they are loud, not because they are dramatic, but because they feel deeply, painfully human. The story of Alexis Gabe is one of those stories. It is the story of a young woman who trusted someone she once loved and never came home. Take a slow breath. Settle in. We're going to walk through this together, quietly and carefully, the way this story deserves to be told. Before we talk about what happened, it is important that you understand who Alexis Gabe was as a person. Alexis was 24 years old and lived in Oakley, California. She was the kind of person who kept things together. She was reliable. She showed up when she said she would. She answered her phone. She checked in with the people she loved, and they always knew where she was. Her family described her as someone who followed a routine. She balanced her work, her relationships, and her time with family in a way that felt steady and consistent. If she was going somewhere, she would say so. If she was running late, she would let someone know. That was just who she was. People around Alexis felt her presence. She was social, warm, and connected to those who mattered most to her. She was not someone who disappeared without a word. That is what made everything that followed so deeply unsettling. Before her disappearance, Alexis had ended a romantic relationship with a man named Marshall Curtis Jones III. Though the relationship was over, the two remained in contact. Some of her family members felt uneasy about this continued connection. They said so. But none of them could have imagined what was coming. On January 26, 2022, Alexis got into her car and drove to Antioch, California, to visit Marshall. It was meant to be a simple, ordinary visit. She left home that evening, and she never returned. When Alexis stopped answering her phone, her family noticed immediately. This was not like her. Minutes turned into hours. Hours passed in silence. Something was wrong. Investigators later reconstructed the events of that night using surveillance footage, cell phone records, and information gathered from people who knew both Alexis and Marshall. What they pieced together painted a deeply troubling picture. According to detectives, Alexis arrived at Marshall's residence in Antioch that evening. She went inside. No emergency calls were made from the area. Nothing seemed unusual from the outside. But inside, authorities came to believe something terrible took place. After that point, Alexis was never seen alive again. When her family reported her missing, the search began quickly. Volunteers came together. Flyers were posted. Social media campaigns spread her name and photograph across the state and beyond. People who had never met Alexis were sharing her story, hoping someone somewhere had seen her. Days later, investigators located Alexis' vehicle, abandoned in Oakley, far from where she had last been seen. The car was processed carefully for any evidence that might help explain what had happened. Authorities never shared every detail from what they found, but it became a key piece of the investigation. As detectives dug deeper, they began focusing their attention on Marshall Curtis Jones III. Inconsistencies appeared in his statements. Things he said did not line up with the surveillance footage, the phone records, or the physical evidence investigators were gathering. Search warrants were obtained. Properties connected to Marshall and his family were examined. Investigators reported that surveillance footage from the area showed Marshall moving large bags and containers in the late hours of the night, the same night Alexis disappeared. Detectives believed that after the crime took place inside the residence, serious efforts were made to remove forensic evidence from the scene.
Suggests that he has something to do with it?
You guys would have to prove it beyond a reason.
Obviously. I don't want to leave you thinking that, for the lack of a better term, just
I know. Oh.
there's a reason.
One of the most discussed aspects of the investigation involved Marshall's mother, Alicia Coleman Clark. Surveillance footage appeared to show suspicious activity linked to her home in the period after Alexis vanished. Investigators examined whether she had any involvement or knowledge of what had occurred. Ultimately, prosecutors determined there was not enough evidence to bring criminal charges against her. Meanwhile, search teams expanded their efforts into rural areas, including parts of Amador County. Cadaver dogs, drones, forensic specialists, and volunteers combed through remote terrain. Detectives followed GPS data, travel routes, and phone records, all in an effort to understand where Marshall had gone and what he had done after that night. The picture that emerged was deeply sorrowful. Investigators came to believe that Alexis had not left the Antioch residence alive. They believed her remains had been moved, and that the remote areas outside the city had been chosen deliberately, chosen because they were hard to find. As the evidence built and arrest warrants were issued, investigators discovered something that brought the case to a new level of urgency. Marshall had left California. He had traveled north, all the way to Kent, Washington. Law enforcement agencies coordinated across multiple states to locate him. Alerts were issued. The public was warned. Alexis' family continued speaking to the media, refusing to let their daughter's story fade. When Marshall was finally found in Washington state, officers moved in to make an arrest. What happened next ensured there would never be a trial. According to investigators, Marshall approached the officers who came to take him into custody, and he was armed with a knife. Police responded. Marshall Curtis Jones III was shot and killed at the scene. His death closed a door that could never be reopened. There would be no courtroom, no full presentation of evidence before a jury, no testimony, no verdict, just silence, and a family left holding questions that may never be fully answered. What was found? Months after Alexis disappeared, a search team working in the remote terrain of Amador County made a heartbreaking discovery: partial human remains. After careful forensic analysis, those remains were confirmed to belong to Alexis Gabe. Investigators said the recovery was one of the most difficult parts of the case. The remains had been scattered across different areas, and officials acknowledged openly that some of her may never be found. It was a truth that was painful to hear, and even more painful for those who loved her. The discovery confirmed what detectives had long believed, that Alexis had been killed the night she went to visit Marshall. But it also raised a quiet kind of grief. A family that had spent months searching now had an answer, but not the one they had hoped for. Even now, some of the most important questions in this case remain unanswered. What happened inside that residence? What was said or felt in those final moments before everything changed? Was there anyone else who knew what had happened afterward and chose to stay silent? Were all of the locations where evidence was disposed of ever truly found? Because Marshall died before facing trial, the full story was never laid out in a courtroom. The evidence investigators gathered was never tested before a judge and jury. Prosecutors never had the chance to stand up and say, in front of the world, here is exactly what happened, step by step, that night. And so the case remains, not fully closed, not fully open. Somewhere in between. A story that has been partially told, but never completely. Alexis Gabe's family continues to seek full transparency. They want to understand everything that was uncovered. They want the world to remember their daughter, not as a case number, not as a headline, but as a person who is loved and who is still missed every single day. A gentle closing thought. Alexis was 24 years old. She had a routine. She had people who loved her. She had her whole life ahead of her. What happened to her is a reminder, quiet and painful, that the people we love can be taken from us in moments we never saw coming, and that those left behind carry a weight that does not simply disappear when a case is closed. Her story matters. It deserves to be remembered carefully and told with respect. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe. We share stories like this every day, told slowly, told honestly, and told with care for the people at the center of them. Come back tomorrow. there is always another story worth sitting with. And if this touched your heart, share it with someone who appreciates stories told this way. It helps more people find their way here, and it keeps stories like Alexis alive in the way they deserve to be.